Hi, I'm making a video on Jordan Peterson, a Canadian clinical psychologist, cultural critic, and professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. Jordan has been studying for a long time the things that make people the way they are, particularly the big five personality traits, also known as the 5-factor model, which are openness to experience, inventiveness, curious versus consistent and cautious, conscientiousness, efficient and organized versus easygoing and careless, extroversion, outgoing, energetic, and solitary versus reserved, agreeableness, friendly and compassionate versus challenging and detached, and finally, neuroticism, sensitive and nervous versus secure and confident. I've been tracking these to what make people conservatives, what make people liberals, and looking at the differences between men and women. And based on these findings, I've discovered that masculinity is order, and that femininity is chaos. We cannot have a structured world based around femininity because it's just too confusing and chaotic. There are too many emotions flying around and we just cannot have emotions in our lives. I say that we are attempting to balance between heaven and hell based on the biblical reading of God, which is where we get our morality, don't you know? And so the heavenness and the hellness of reality, it tracks to the masculinity and the femininity. And that's why these damn trans people are ruining everything. And by the way, I also wrote a book. It's called The 12 Rules for Life. And anyways, that's Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson, because he's really been taking off recently with the release of his book, 12 Rules for Life, in which he tells you how you should live if you want to live a fulfilling and quality life. Now, Jordan Peterson has taken off to such an extent that even people who don't follow things at all, such as my wife, are now asking me, hey, have you heard of this Jordan Peterson guy? Earlier on today, she was like, have you heard of Jordan Peterson? I said, yes, why are you asking? And she pointed to an article which had been written in a New Zealand publication about him. So he's really all over the media right now. Who is Jordan Peterson? Well, according to the wiki, he is a clinical psychologist, cultural critic, and professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. I've looked a bit into his former work, and he basically made his career on exploring something called the Big 5 personality traits: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. They are basically a heuristic, which is to say a non-optimal measurement of various traits of human beings. The categories are somewhat subjective, but are defined fairly clearly, and social scientists have had varying levels of success with analyzing and correlating these different traits to different groups of human beings. And there's also another measure called the hexaco model of personality structure, which postulates a 6th trait, which is honesty, humility. And apparently the theory behind these traits and the way that they are conceptualized are different than the Big 5. However, Peterson has based his work in the Big 5 personality traits. Peterson has been around for quite a long time, since the 80s, and you can see some old videos of him with a mullet looking like Seinfeld, giving an obscure lecture about this or the other. He studied a range of things, including aggression arising from drug and alcohol abuse. He studied psychopharmacology, abnormal neuroclinical personality, social, industrial, organizational, religious, ideological, political, and creativity psychology. He has co-authored more than 100 academic papers, and he has 20 years of clinical practice. The first book he wrote was called Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief, where he tried to discover why people believe in religion and why people don't. He was also concerned with figuring out why people commit atrocities, and he looked at the gulags, Auschwitz concentration camp, and the Rwandan genocide. He added into that science of how the brain works and the relation of beliefs and emotions to these atrocities. So first things first, whether I like Jordan Peterson or not, I have to say yes, he is an academic, because that's just what he is. You can't take away someone's academicness just because you don't like them. He's done peer-reviewed papers. He's obviously a well-studied individual who has a long academic history, and he's obviously qualified and accomplished in academia. But the reason that he's so popular, and that not long ago he was making $51,153 per month on Patreon, although how much money he's making has since been hidden, is because he made this courageous stand against a bill called C-16.
I said with Bill C-16 that I wouldn't speak the language of the radical leftists, because I don't think that that language should define the game. But let's say it does. So here's the game. The world is a battleground of groups, and they're battling for power. That's it. That's the game. And some of them win, and they oppress those who don't win. So that's how we're going to view the world. Okay, now the leftists say, okay, well, here's the oppressed people. The oppressors, the patriarchal types, they should be ashamed of themselves and give up some power. And the right-wingers, the radical right-wingers look at that and they say, oh, I see, so the game is ethnic identity, is it? It's identity politics. Okay, we're white males. We're not going to lose. That's the right-wing version of identity politics. It's like, screw you. If we're going to divide into groups, if we're going to divide into tribes, and I'm in my tribe, I'm not going to get all guilty and lose. I'm going to get all cruel and win. Well, the Soviets played the left-wing game and like killed who knows how many tens of millions of people. You can't even count it accurately. The estimates range from 20 to 100 million. Those are pretty big error bars. And the Maoists, maybe 100 million, certainly 60 million. So I have a book rule in there that says, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. And it's a very dark chapter about the motivations of the Columbine High School killers and this other guy named Karl Panzram, who was a serial rapist and arsonist and murderer. And he wrote an autobiography, and the Columbine kids also wrote about why they did what they did. They're resentful to the core, bitter, resentful, terrible. And, well, I'm suggesting that people stay away from that resentfulness and bitterness, even though life is hard and there's malevolence in the world.
The thing that stands out about Jordan Peterson's stand against C16 is that he put the status of martyr on himself. He was not persecuted in any way. Nothing bad happened to Jordan Peterson.
A trans person in your class has come to your class and said they want to be called
That's never happened. And I would call them she.
So you would. So you've kind of changed your tune on that.
No, I said that right from the beginning. What I said at the beginning was that I was not going to cede the linguistic territory to radical leftists, regardless of whether or not it was put in law. That's what I said. And then the people who came after me said, oh, you must be transphobic and you mistreat a student in your class. It's like, I never mistreated a student in my class. I'm not transphobic, and that isn't what I said.
Well, except you've also called trans campaigners authoritarian, haven't you? I mean, isn't that grossly...
Well, only in the broader context of my claims that radical leftist ideologues are authoritarian, which they are.
He put out a bunch of YouTube videos and a bunch of commentary criticizing the bill and received a ton of pushback from people. And transgender activists and so forth don't like it. That's not persecution of him. After he received this pushback, he tripled down and said, I will never use the pronouns that people want me to use. Next they will lead to Auschwitz and me being in the camps and sterilizing people, because that's what happens when you use pronouns. The National Post published an op-ed by Peterson in which he elaborated on his opposition to the bill and explained why he publicly made a stand against it. I will never use words I hate, like the trendy and artificially constructed words Z and Zer. Those words are at the vanguard of a postmodern, radical leftist ideology that I detest, and which is, in my professional opinion, frighteningly similar to the Marxist doctrines that killed at least 100 million people in the 20th century. I've been studying authoritarianism on the right and left for 35 years. I wrote a book, Maps of Meaning, the Architecture of Belief, on the topic, which explores how ideologies hijack language and belief. Result of my studies, I've come to believe that Marxism is a murderous ideology. I believe its practitioners in modern universities should be ashamed of themselves for continuing to promote such vicious, untenable, anti-human ideas, and for indoctrinating their students with these beliefs. I am therefore not going to mouth Marxist words that would make me a puppet of the radical left, and that's not going to happen. Period. Apparently he received 2 letters of warning for just generally being a douche, but he got to stay at the University of Toronto and still teaching there to this day, so nothing bad has happened to him. He just raised a huge fuss about it, made a ton of videos, mischaracterizing what the fucking bill actually was. Psychology professor Jordan Peterson has made headlines the last 2 weeks, claiming that the bill before the Federal House of Commons is an unprecedented attack on free speech. He has claimed that the new laws will criminalize the failure to use individuals' preferred pronouns. In a rally at the University of Toronto last week, he went so far as to say that the bill is the most serious infringement on freedom of speech ever in Canada. The thing is, he is wrong. Bill C-16 does 3 things. First, it adds the words gender, identity, or expression to the Canadian Human Rights Code. This will prevent the federal government and businesses within federal jurisdiction, like banks, from discriminating on the basis of gender identity and gender expression. The federal government is late to this game. Most of the provinces and territories already include gender identity and gender expression in the provincial human rights codes. Skip a little bit. The second thing that the bill does is add the words gender, identity, or expression to 2 sections of the criminal code. So surely this must be what Peterson is getting at. Criminal criminalizing something? Well, let's take a closer look. It will add the words gender identity and expression to section 318(4) of the code, which defines an identifiable group for the purposes of advocating genocide and the public incitement of hatred. It joins color, race, religion, national or ethnic origin, age, sex, sexual orientation, or mental or physical disability. Finally, BC 16 also adds gender identity and expression to section 718.2(a)(I) of the criminal code dealing with sentencing for hate crimes. The provision provides that evidence that an offense is motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate can be taken into account by courts in sentencing. The list already includes race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, or any other similar factor. Skip. As long as we have hate speech laws, then it is a legal no-brainer that trans and non-gender binary individuals should be afforded the same protection as all other Canadians. And that's what Bill C-16 is about: equality for trans and non-gender binary Canadians. It's pretty simple and right and decent. If that's all that he had to face, then I don't know how he's a victim, and I don't know how he's a martyr. Nonetheless, he's built this entire aura around himself of being a victim, of playing the victim, of victimhood. It's not rhetoric I generally like to use, but I just don't know how else to see the situation.
Well, I think that the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal is probably obligated by their own tangled web to bring me in front of it. If they find me, I won't pay it. If they put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike. I'm not doing this. And that's that. I'm not using the words that other people require me to use, especially if they're made up by radical left-wing ideologues. Now, if our society comes to some sort of consensus over the next while about how we'll solve the pronoun problem, let's call it, and that becomes part of popular parlance, and it seems to solve the problem properly without sacrificing the distinction between singular and plural, and without requiring me to memorize an impossible list of an indefinite number of pronouns, then I would be willing to reconsider my position.
Oh, boo-hoo! Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin. This is serious. I know. This really is the world's smallest violin. See?
Every time I see Jordan Peterson, I just think fake martyr. A guy who's pretending like somebody is actually going after him properly. He never got in trouble for misgendering someone. He's never been asked to gender someone a certain way. He's just said, because of this bill, I may have to gender someone a certain way. It's all hypothetical. It's not real. Give me lots of money for that. Jordan Peterson has since increased his exposure by appearing on just about every right-wing show you could imagine, and more recently he's gained a ton of exposure for an adversarial interview that he had on Britain's Channel 4 with a woman called Cathy Newman, in which they talked about feminism, social justice, men and women, etc. So I rewatched the interview just now, and overall I think it was a bad showing for Cathy Newman. The main reason being that she kept saying, so what you're saying is this, or she would add something to what he said.
You're saying, well, that's just a fact of life. Women aren't necessarily going to get to the top.
No, I'm not saying it doesn't matter either.
You're saying it's a fact
there are
of
multiple
life.
reasons for it. Well, I made the argument there. It's like it depends on
So
who
you don't
defines
believe
it.
in equal pay?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Because a lot of people listening to you will just say, I mean, are we going back to the dark
That's
ages
because they're actually
here?
not listening.
I'm
They're just
listening very
projecting
carefully,
what
and I'm
they think.
hearing you basically saying women need to just accept they're never going to make it on equal terms, equal outcomes is how you defined it.
No, I didn't
If
say
I was
that.
a young
I said
woman
that equal...
watching that, I would go, well, I might as well just go and play with my Cindy dolls and give
didn't
up
say
trying
that.
at school because I'm not going to get the top job I want because
said
there's
that
someone sitting there saying it's not possible and it's not desirable, it's going to make you miserable.
Desirable. That's what I said. It's a
Yeah,
bad
not
social
desirable.
goal. I didn't say that women shouldn't be striving for the top or anything like that, because I don't believe that for a second. The things that predict success in the workplace are intelligence and conscientiousness. Agreeableness negatively predicts success in the workplace. And so does high negative emotion.
You're saying that women aren't intelligent enough to run these top companies?
No, I didn't say that at all.
You said that female traits don't predict success.
But I didn't say that intelligence wasn't.
conscientiousness
I didn't say that
do.
intelligence and conscientiousness
Well, you were saying that
weren't
intelligence
female
and
traits.
conscientiousness by implication are not female traits.
No,
I mean,
I'm not
that's very
saying that.
dangerous territory.
I'm not saying that at all.
Are women less
There's-
intelligent than men, by and
No,
large?
no, they're not.
I actually felt Cathy did quite a good job in the first 5 minutes or so. It was setting up to be quite a good interview because she was asking very pertinent questions. But as the interview went on, it seemed like she was too desperate to try to get him about something. And to the viewer, that can become very irritating, especially if you keep trying to get somebody over something and they keep saying, that's not what I mean, that's not what I'm saying, like, that's not my point. I actually think when you're having a contentious conversation with somebody, it's not wrong, always, to say, okay, you've got a point there, or to cede something. There seems to be this idea that you can never cede anything anybody is saying, but that makes somebody just look stubborn and difficult, and I think that was the thing that Cathy Newman struggled with throughout that interview. I think the point of contention with Jordan Peterson is not his smaller micro points about things like, oh, women are more agreeable, that's why they don't have as high salaries because they won't fight or negotiate for that kind of thing, or that women make certain job choices which means that they get paid less, and less women are in positions of power because of their job choices, and it's not because the system is stacked against them, etc. To me, those are not things that I would really bother fighting much about, because I think that they are besides the actual point, which is the principles of the kind of society that we want to live in. And I would say, okay, say women are more often nurses. Why don't we just pay nurses more? Why don't we provide a lot more services to women? If women are going to have maternity leave and look after the children, they should have way more benefits, and when they come back to work, they should not be penalized or held back. It should be about the type of society that we want to live in. Do we want to live in a society where the CEOs of certain corporations get paid millions of dollars a year, whereas the everyday fucking worker at Walmart and so forth gets paid absolutely shit all, not even a livable wage? The main question to me is, what sort of society do we want to live in? And it is more a question of what's right and what's moral and what we value, than just endlessly fighting over, oh, is the wage gap about job choice and so forth. When some feminists, and including Cathy Newman, get stuck on that ground with somebody like Jordan Peterson, it's just going to go around in circles and nobody's really going to learn anything. So I think because she was perceived to be strawmanning so hardcore throughout that conversation, and also because I think she was fixated on elements of the gender pay gap, that I can see why Jordan Peterson was given a massive bump from that, and it very much appeals to a kind of sense that they're trying to undermine men and elevate women to male detriment. That could appeal very much to a sense of anger and loneliness amongst men. And not to mention that he just seemed very calm and cool and collected. But I think the story with Jordan Peterson doesn't end there, because you can watch that interview and say, I totally agree with everything Jordan Peterson said about female job choices. I agree that the personality trait of agreeableness is why women don't get paid so much. I agree that Cathy Newman was strawmanning him constantly, and for some reason I agree with his assertion that trans activists believe the same things that Mao did that led to millions of deaths.
You're saying someone who's trying to work out their gender identity, who may well have struggled with that, had quite a tough time over the years.
With it, yeah.
You're comparing them with, Chairman Mao, who saw the deaths of millions of people. Well, even if the activists, they're trans people too. They have a right to say these things.
Yeah, but they don't have a right to speak for their whole community.
To compare them to Chairman Mao, or, Pinochet, Augusto Pinochet. I mean, this is grossly insensitive.
I didn't compare them to Pinochet.
Well,
I did compare them to
He was an authoritarian.
He's a right-winger, though. I was comparing them to the left-wing totalitarians. Okay. And I do believe they are left-wing totalitarians.
Under Mao, millions of people died.
Right.
I mean, there's no comparison between Mao and a trans activist, is there?
Why not?
Because trans activists aren't killing millions of people?
The philosophy that's guiding their utterances is the same philosophy.
Even though that is a completely insane link to create that doesn't make any sense, but I love Jordan Peterson, and anybody who says anything even remotely critical of his views is a horrible liar. I love him, and still not realize that he is a total fucking hack because of his apologism for religion. Now, Jordan Peterson has been working very hard to make a Christian reading of reality and an extremely black and white sense of what things are popular and in vogue, and he's doing quite a good job. You can sneak your way into things for the anti-social justice, anti-feminism stuff, which is very popular online, and then gradually really start pushing your fundamentalist Christianity view of the world.
Well, Dostoyevsky, I believe it was in Crime and Punishment, although he makes the same point in many of his books, he makes a very fundamental point, and this is the kind of point that I think that people who haven't investigated these matters down this particular literary and philosophical pathway never grapple with. Dostoyevsky said straightforwardly, if there's no God, so if there's no higher value, let's say, if there's no transcendent value, then you can do whatever you want. And that's the question that he's investigating. And you see, this is why I have such frustration, say, with people like Sam Harris, the sort of radical atheists, because they seem to think that once human beings abandon their grounding in the transcendent, that the plausible way forward is with a kind of purist rationality that automatically attributes to other people equivalent value. It's like, I just don't understand that. They believe that that's the rational pathway. What the hell is irrational about me getting exactly what I want from every one of you whenever I want it at every possible second? Why is that irrational?
Jordan Peterson believes that all of the morality in the world is gotten from religion and from the Bible.
The moral presuppositions of a culture are instantiated in its stories. They're not instantiated in its explicit philosophy. There might be a layer of explicit philosophy, and of course there is in the West, and a layer of explicit law, but underneath that there are stories. And there isn't anything under the stories except maybe behavior, you know, and that's so implicit it doesn't even actually count. It's not a cognitive operation. And so this is the story, these are the stories that are underneath our culture. And so there better be something to them. That's what we hope. But more importantly, maybe we shouldn't toss them away without knowing what they mean, because if we toss them away, then we are throwing everything that we depend on away, as far as I can tell, and we will pay for it. We'll pay for it individually because we'll be weak. You know, because if you're not firm in your convictions, then someone else who's firm in their convictions, you're their puppet, like instantly. And then you're also the puppet of your own doubts, right? Because unless you have convictions, you're going to generate doubts like mad, because everyone does. And then the doubts will win, and you'll be paralyzed, because there'll be, you know, 50% of you moving forward and 50% of you frozen stiff, and that'll be enough just to lodge you in place.
Do you believe?
I believe.
He believes. Hallelujah. Amen. God bless. Amen. Hallelujah.
There was a video of him actually driving himself to tears over how much he hates atheism, how much it has destroyed the spirituality of the world, how atheism leads to the Stalins and the Maos. Or he could have just been crying over the fact that he finds his own words just so immensely poetic. However, this video has been scrubbed completely from the internet, and there is only a few small snippets of him crying about individualism.
A close reading of 20th century history indicates, as nothing else can, the horrors that accompany loss of faith in the idea of the individual. It is only the individual, after all, who suffers. The group does not suffer. Only those who compose it. Thus, the reality of the individual must be regarded as primary. If suffering is to be regarded seriously, without such regard, there can be no motivation to reduce suffering, and therefore no respite. Instead, the production of individual suffering can and has and will be again rationalized and justified for its supposed benefits for the future and the group.
I saw that some time ago, and I remember him talking about religion in that clip, but I have no way of confirming that because I've searched everywhere and it's gone from the internet. I suppose he deleted it. But it certainly shows that he sees himself as an incredibly prosthetic, meaningful, deep, poetic, emotional pontificator. He drives himself to tears with the floweriness of his own language. But at the end of the day, he's saying things like, reality is heaven and hell.
And people know that. And so I say, well, delineate that out too. So you know where you're headed when you fall off the path. And so then you're running away and running towards, it's like, yes, well, that's heaven and hell. And you need it, and they're real. They're as real as anything that you can. It depends on what you mean by real, I suppose, but they're as real as you make them. How about that? And people can make hell pretty real. The reason that this is a tumultuous time is because it actually is a time for discussion of first principles, and it's that, and yes. First principles are virtually at the level of theology, right? Mm-hmm. Because first principles are the things that you assume and then move forward. It's like, well, what should we assume? Well, the dignity of the human soul. Let's start with that. You can't treat yourself properly without assuming that. You can't have a relationship with another person. You can't stabilize your family. You can't have a functional society. So what does it mean for this human soul to have dignity? Well, the part of the idea is that you're participating in creation itself, and you do that with your actions and your language. And you get to decide whether you're tilting the world a bit more towards heaven or a bit more towards hell. And that's actually what you're doing. So that's a place where the literal and the metaphorical truth come together. And people are they're terrified of that idea, as they should be, because it's a massive responsibility. It's a massive realization of responsibility to understand that all the decisions that you make during the day are decisions between hell and heaven, essentially. But I think there is no truer way of saying that.
So I'd say much of his psychological, social science-driven work is kind of like a Trojan horse for his Christian analysis. He can say a lot of things about studies that he's done, peer-reviewed work with his colleagues, looking at the big five personality traits and trying to track those to certain political beliefs, and then just throw in something that's complete and total utter bullshit that people won't even notice is utter bullshit.
When Nietzsche diagnosed the death of God about 150 years ago, and he made three predictions. He said, people will, as a consequence, our culture will shake to the roots, will become nihilistic or totalitarian in response, or will invent our own values. Okay, those were his three possibilities. And then, of course, we became nihilistic and totalitarian through the 20th century, and many tens of millions of people died as a consequence, which Nietzsche also foretold specifically. He said that 100 million people would die because of the rise of communist ideas. He said that in Will to Power.
Now, as someone who grew up reading Nietzsche, when I heard him say that, I was like, what? When the fuck did Nietzsche say that 100 million people would die in the 20th century? That's 100% made up. He never fucking said that. I did some research about Nietzsche talking about socialism, and it was very scant. He barely really addressed that topic. What he did say was socialism, or the tyranny of the meanest and most brainless, that is to say the superficial, the envious and the mummers brought to its zenith, is, as a matter of fact, the logical conclusion of modern ideas and their latent anarchy. Skipping ahead, men follow, but no longer their reason. That is why socialism is on the whole a hopelessly bitter affair, and there's nothing more amusing than to observe the discord between the poisonous and desperate faces of present-day socialists, and what wretched and nonsensical feelings does not their style reveal to us. He also said that socialism delays peace on Earth. But him literally saying that socialism will kill 100 million people. Where the fuck did he say that? It doesn't exist. And that's my issue with Jordan Peterson, is that he will just throw in things that are completely made up. Like in a conversation where he's talking about PC egalitarians and PC authoritarians.
I'm curious, can you give us any insights on your research, what you discovered about people like Smugly Puff and the others at the rally opposing you?
Well, I'll just give some context and then give it over to Christine, but we've actually been studying the full spectrum of political beliefs. So politically correct, political correctness.
Social justice, radicalism from the left.
Political correctness, PC egalitarians and PC authoritarians, PC egalitarians and PC authoritarians, PC movement, PC authoritarianism and PC egalitarianism. PC authoritarians, white men are racist, white men are the patriarchy. But that's not necessarily true. PC authoritarians or left-wing authoritarians against white men that claim that white racism exists, the opposite.
Interesting. So
them being biological. So that's PC authoritarians.
But it would be no different than if I just made up an arbitrary category for conservatives. I could call them like angry egalitarian conservatives or mean-spirited authoritarian conservatives, and then link their beliefs to those of Franco or Mussolini, and then try to ascribe those to like the general populace of conservatives, and it would all be a bunch of bunk, because it would just be me projecting my biases against conservatives into so-called studies. It wouldn't actually really be proving anything. And if someone challenged me, I could say, but it's all rooted in the big five personality traits, and we can see that the big five personality traits, they track to this and that and this and that based on my studies. Therefore, this terminology of angry egalitarian conservatives is valid, even though I've just made that up, and I'm just shoehorning my political beliefs into this category. That is all that PC egalitarians authoritarians is. Shoehorning the words PC into something is absurd, and especially trying to link PC authoritarians to genocidal killers throughout the 20th century, it's very transparent. Before my conclusion, there's a few honorable mentions I need to make in regards to Jordan Peterson. Such exciting highlights as that time that he was going to start a database of quote-unquote Marxist or neo-Marxist professors so that he could shame them out of the profession of teaching, which seems to me to be the extreme opposite of what he purports to believe. If there are professors who are against your speech being regulated by the government so that you have to call a trans woman she, if there is a crusade against them and they end up getting fired, that is the worst possible thing that could ever happen. But if there's some neo-Marxist professors, so what? I don't like neo-Marxism. Neo-Marxism is a big bad thing that I don't like, so just fire them, that's fine. Fire the fucking person, destroy their life, destroy their career. If I like misgendering people, then it's a big injustice. Pure hypocrisy. And he was doing things like publicly outing people who are protesting him as communists. One of the communists, really, who celebrated the shutdown of a Ryerson talk studying business. That's just doxing. That's saying like, hey, here's some personal identifying information about this individual. Go and attack them. That's just using your fans as a mob. And you should be against mob justice. If you're such a fucking individualist. Eventually he had to say, I considered building such a website, but put plans on hiatus as I've talked it over with others and decided it might add excessively to current polarization. No shit that it would do that. Wow, targeting people's careers for believing things that you don't like would add to polarization? Mind blown. And more recently, there was a conversation between him and the outfit Vice.
It's not easy to solve a complicated problem. And like ready-made ideological solutions don't work. They just make it worse.
But come on, that's just like a maxim. You're not actually addressing the question, which is like, isn't there harm that is trying to be solved?
There isn't a question. There's a set of questions, and no one's posing them. Here's a question: can men and women work together in the workplace?
Yes, I do it.
How do you know?
Because I work with a lot of women.
Right. Well, it's been happening for what, 40 years, and things are deteriorating very rapidly at the moment in terms of the relationships between men and women. Is there sexual harassment in the workplace? Yes. Should it stop? That'd be good. Will it? Well, not at the moment it won't, because we don't know what the rules are.
Do you think men and women can work in the workplace together?
I don't know.
Without sexual harassment?
We'll see.
We'll see. How many years will it take for men and women working in the workplace together?
More than 40.
To get a sense.
We don't know what the rules are. Like what? Here's a rule.
Don't
How about no makeup in the workplace?
Why would that be a rule?
Why should you wear makeup in the workplace? Isn't that sexually provocative?
No.
It's not?
No.
Well, what is it then? What's the purpose of makeup?
Some people would like to just put on makeup.
Why?
I don't know why.
Why do you make your lips red? Because they turn red during sexual arousal. That's why. Why do you put rouge on your cheeks? Same reason.
I mean, look.
How about high heels?
What are they for? What about high heels?
What about them? They're there to exaggerate sexual attractiveness. That's what high heels do. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't use sexual displays in the workplace. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that that is what they're doing. And that is what they're doing.
Do you feel like a serious woman who does not want sexual harassment in the workplace, do you feel like if she wears makeup in the workplace that she is somewhat being critical?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think that.
We don't know what the rules are in the workplace when it comes to sexual harassment. Now, I felt this journalist actually did a fantastic job by just seeming as perplexed as an average everyday person would. Somebody who's not really involved in this whole back and forth between feminists and anti-feminists, simply reacting to the idea that women are hypocrites for wearing makeup because now we don't know the rules, which is fucking ridiculous because it's not a matter of them wearing clothes or wearing makeup, it's a matter of how they treat you personally. If an individual is acting towards you like they are attracted to you, that is something you're going to have to navigate and try to read. And if you read it wrong and they don't actually like you, it's on you to learn how to back off and be like, okay, I misread that. It seemed like because the way that you were acting that you liked me, but I'm sorry. But you can't just be like, oh, she's got makeup on, she's got like lipstick, she's wearing high heels. That means that she wants men to come on to her. Hey, baby, what's up? Just like in the staff room or some shit. Oh, you look so good in those high heels. Oh, I love your rouge. We should go in the closet and make out. How socially inept do you have to be to think that that is an invitation? But the thing is, his defenders have said over and over again, it's a heavily edited clip. One day they'll release the full footage and we will see that will totally vindicate Jordan Peterson. Everything's always out of context if it looks bad. If it looks good, it's totally in context. I can't see how added context would make those comments better. But if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I guess One day, maybe we'll see. People have also said that Jordan Peterson's actual point in this clip was that we don't know what the rules are, meaning we don't know what is and is not sexual harassment. However, that is not a valid defense of this particular clip because that has nothing to do with his comments about makeup. So that wasn't the main point that he was making in this clip. Maybe in the full interview that was his main point overall. I don't know, but in this particular clip, it appears that his main point was that makeup is sexually arousing to men, and so it's confusing and we don't know what the rules are. Okay, finally at my conclusions here. So Jordan Peterson, in my opinion, is a very lucrative panderer. The place that I take issue with him is his ability to analyze things that he actually researches and samples. It is the case that academics will regularly interpret each other's studies different than they would themselves. Somebody can put together a study, say Charles Murray, about the intelligence of people, and other academics can look at those studies and interpret them differently than the very author of that study might interpret them, because intelligent, reasonable analysis that doesn't take logical leaps and actually makes sense is an entirely different skill than actually creating studies and putting them together. And I have no faith in Jordan Peterson's ability to actually analyze, because when he goes to that next step, he says, the world is heaven and hell. Or this idea that neo-Marxism leads to genocide and everyone killing themselves like Mao. Those are not reasonable, rational analyses. Those are pandering. Those are pandering to right-wingers, pandering to people who hate liberals, pandering to people who hate feminists. It's lazy, it's ideological, and it's easy. And that's a very surefire way to make a ton of money on Patreon. And as I said, he has this massive word salad that he constantly throws out there that sounds incredibly intelligent, flowing, and deep and poetic. But then he's also throwing in completely unfounded comments. So my overall sense of Jordan Peterson is that he has the perfect level of academic wankeriness and the perfect level of academic underpinning that you cannot criticize him or say that you don't agree with him on a certain level without his fans saying he's a clinical now I just always want to talk in the Peterson voice. He's a clinical psychologist, he has a long career, he's eminently qualified, he's a lot smarter than you, Tim, you dumb fuck. That it's almost like he is a cult figure. So I think it's gonna be a long year or 2 or 3 of me talking with Jordan Peterson fans about how I've taken him out of context and I don't understand him and how the media's against him and I'm incredibly dishonest and I'm a liar and I'm the worst person in the fucking world for daring to question him, and I'm not very much looking forward to that. I also think that some of his opinions seem very postmodernist. When he says that life itself is a battle between heaven and hell, I think that is very much just his own personal Jordan Peterson narrative. That's him putting a Jordan Peterson spin on religion. When he says liberalism is tied to neo-Marxism, which is authoritarianism / Mao, and they believe the same things as many who murdered millions throughout history, that's the Jordan Peterson narrative. That's his postmodern personal narrative and his personal take on things. He also believes that science is valid, and he also says,
so people often ask me, do you believe in God? Which I don't like that question. First of all, it's an attempt to box me in a sense. And the reason that it's an attempt to box me in is because the question is asked so that I can be firmly placed on one side of a binary argument. And the reason I don't like to answer it is because A, I don't like to be boxed in, and B, because I don't know what the person means by believe or God. And they think they know. And the probability that they construe belief and construe God the same way I do is virtually zero. So it's a question that doesn't work for me on multiple levels of analysis. But strangely enough, just as we were talking, the answer to that question popped into my head. I act as if God exists. Now you can decide for yourself whether that means that I believe in him, so to speak.
Because apparently in his own personal view, it's okay for a Christian to not potentially believe in God, because it's his own personal narrative. It's his own postmodern Jordan Peterson narrative. And I just find that quite ironic.
But what seems to be one of the factors that seems to be similar to both the right and the left authoritarians is a pronounced demand for order. What I've recommended to people is clean up your room.